email? What does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or news.
The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett.
Today's guest is someone who brings a rare blend of heart, humor, and deep perspective to how we could talk to each other. Amy Sandler is a speaker, executive coach, and mindfulness teacher who currently serves as principal coach and podcast host at Radical Candor. Amy believes genuine curiosity is a starting point for meaningful change, and she brings that belief into every room she enters, whether she's working with leaders on communication, resilience, or simply showing up more honestly. In our conversation today, we'll explore how to handle hard conversations with more clarity and care, how mindfulness can make us better leaders, and why letting go can sometimes help us move forward. I think you referred to it as I give up, and at least one thing I saw. So welcome to the show, Amy. So happy to have you here.
I am really excited to be with you today and to have this conversation, Clint.
Oh, definitely. Me too. Thank you. So I like to think of all the people that come on the show as superheroes, and all superheroes have a backstory. So what is your origin story? How did you get to where you are today?
Oh, I love that question. Well, I have to say I'm in my home office, and I've got a picture of me and Boston Red Sox player Carlton Fisk, who I don't know if any of your listeners would know, but he was a catcher for the Boston Red Sox. And so my first dream, I was going to be a Boston Red Sox player, but that didn't quite pan out. I also, Clint, when I was in third grade, I got a note in my report card which said, "Amy's very sensitive. She cries when she gets criticism." And so here I am now teaching feedback. So I think the origin story is we tend to kind of teach the things that are maybe hard for us or that we know is important that we've had to learn. I've had to do a lot of unlearning and relearning. And I think for me, the biggest thing being kind of a recovering perfectionist, people pleaser, et cetera, what I have found at work is that to build real human relationships, which is, I think, what we're going to be talking about today, we have to actually do the work on ourselves so that we can kind of manage the emotional challenges, manage the identity issues that might come up at work when we feel very attached to sort of our job or being the boss or whatever those titles mean. So I'm into sort of the deep end of those things. That's fun for me.
Well, we're going to dig into it later, but I'm curious about the criticism part because what I found about myself is somebody can give me 21 bullet items and the first 20 can say you're the most amazing thing ever, and the 21st one says something bad and I focus on the bad one. I mean, I don't know why that is, but 100%. I would love to fix that.
We will talk about that. That would be great.
So let's start with some definitions. How do you define radical candor?
Great question. First of all, Radical Candor, it's a book. So Kim and I went to Harvard Business School together, although we didn't know each other at the time. But Kim had worked at Google and at Apple and kind of put together all of the hard-earned knowledge she got from making a lot of mistakes there into this amazing book called Radical Candor, which is about being a kick-ass boss without losing your humanity. But it's really for everyone who wants to get better at work. And kind of a spoiler alert, because it's about people, it actually also works for outside of work for those relationships. So it's a book. It's a great book. It's a podcast. I'm the host of the podcast. It's a company. So we do keynotes and trainings for teams and companies. But the idea, it's actually a management philosophy. And its core, it's actually a really simple idea. The simple idea is that I can care about the people that I work with, like as real human beings. At the same time, I'm willing to challenge them directly. What's radical is that we're doing both, because we tend to just do one or the other, and we don't do both. And I can certainly share some stories about what it looks like, but that's really it at its core. Like, can I, care about you as a human being at the same time I'm willing to actually challenge you?
So I think it's interesting because when I hear the word radical, it almost has a negative connotation. I mean, it's radical. We're going to do radical surgery, or it's just so different. But it doesn't have to be negative, right?
No, I mean, and it's interesting because the root word radical means rare. And so that's actually what is being meant here. It's rare that we are both caring and challenging. It's rare that we're being both kind and clear. And interestingly, so Kim's book first came out, I want to say 2017 or so. And before it came out, there was a very successful viral talk she did at First Round. And that talk, it was sort of like a TED talk, but it was for First Round. It went viral. So by the time the book came out, people really wanted to invest in it and make an app. This was almost 10 years ago, so the tech wasn't there yet. But we made a second edition of the book, and we corrected the name to Compassionate Candor. Now, the book is still Radical Candor, but Compassionate Candor gets at the idea of both care personally and challenge directly. What was happening was because it was Silicon Valley and because of the word radical, people were misunderstanding it as like permission to act like a jerk. Like, hey, Clint, let me be radically candid with you. That's a crappy shirt and the book behind you, right? Like, it's like, no, that is not radical candor. That is the spirit of what we would call obnoxious aggression. It is not like a get out of jail free card to just say whatever the heck you want to say.
Yeah, she actually opens the book with that. I read the second edition then, clearly, because she opens the book with that and talks about the show Silicon Valley and she talks, because I was going to say that she talks about obnoxious aggression and manipulative insincerity, and she differentiates those two, right?
Yeah. Would it be helpful to kind of walk through the framework for folks so they kind of get a gist? Yeah. So if you can imagine this idea of like care personally and challenge directly, and if any of you listening, if you went to business school or you worked at a consulting firm, I know you've done a lot of project management. So what do you learn in consulting? Just put two hard ideas on like a 2x2 grid, like an x-axis and a y-axis. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine the vertical axis is care personally, and the horizontal axis is challenge directly. So in the top right corner there, we're caring, we're challenging. That would be radical candor. But we're not perfect. We make mistakes all the time. And so this framework is basically a way to think about mistakes we can make in a conversation and improve them. So one mistake we've already talked about, which is obnoxious aggression, which is high challenge, low care. And so I can tell a quick story of what obnoxious aggression looks like, because we're big believers in storytelling, and I'd love to hear some of your stories too. So this was a time in my career when my background is in marketing and communications, and I was at this company. We were launching a big website. There were a lot of technical issues on this project, so the project was very far behind. I don't know if you can relate, if you've ever been involved. I'm sure with your project management, I'm sure that's never happened, right? But in this one, we were very far behind, and I kept writing these emails. By the way, we were, everyone was based in one location, but I was in a different location. But this was before all this sort of high-tech way to connect. So I felt like I was not being listened to. I kept saying, hey, nobody's listened to the research. Nobody's listened to the research. And finally, I got so frustrated. I wrote this email. Clint, I may have sent it to the chairman of the board and my project owners, the CEO, which is their boss. And I may have said something like how we were wasting millions of dollars because we weren't listening to stakeholder interests through the research. So it felt like really good to write that email, I got to say, to get it off my chest. But this is not a good idea. This is obnoxious aggression. It's public criticism like that. It's going over someone's head like that. And I think, very often we sometimes think like, oh, it's okay. They're several layers above me. They can handle it. It's like, no, they're still a human being. Like I still should have had a one-on-one real-time conversation. So that's obnoxious aggression. That's like front stabbing, acting like a jerk. That's the spirit of obnoxious aggression when you're just, challenging but not caring. Now,
but you got a response, didn't you?
What'd you say?
But you got some feedback.
I got some feedback. All right. Yeah. And here's the thing. Like, if you think about it, obnoxious aggression is the only other quadrant where like the person knows there's a problem. Like you've highlighted there's a problem, right?
Yeah.
So, but the problem with this, it's a very short-term solution because you've blown up any kind of trust. And often what happens, rather than moving kind of up on care personally, we move over out into what we call manipulative insincerity. This is when we're not caring, we're not challenging. We've kind of given up, and not in the way that I talk about in my podcast and my TED Talk, which we can talk about, but we've given up in the sense of, oh, this person's never going to change. Oh, it's not worth it. Or we're talking about people, not to them. the head of Pixar wrote, if more truth is happening in the hallways than in the meeting rooms, we've got a problem. And that's manipulative insincerity. The meeting after the meeting, like, oh, great idea. And then afterwards, oh, that's never going to happen. Right? So we can all relate to that one. And so what happened was I was still in this organization. Years passed. I was no longer on this this tech project, but it was still ongoing. And so there was a new project owner, and they came on board and they said, hey, the reason this project failed was because there was no research. Well, I spent years doing the research. I spent more years trying to talk about it. And at that point, I was so burnt out. I was just like, oh, yeah, good luck. No care, no challenge. And, I share this story because sometimes it can be fun to tell stories and you act like a jerk, or it can be fun to tell stories when you care so much, you just don't say something. But this one, manipulative insincerity, is hard because you really have to look at yourself like, how did I get here? Like, I don't think we wake up in the morning like, how can I just, not care and not challenge? It's really the most toxic of workplaces. I'm just going to pause there. Like, what's coming up for you on that?
No, I totally agree with everything you're saying. It's so funny because in this role, I interview so many people, and I get into my little cocoon of we all care about each other, the psychological safety. And then to hear stories like, okay, it's all right. I don't live in the real world sometimes. I have to step back out to the podcast world, and in the real world, people are all those things. There's narcissism. There's this everybody's fault but my own. Unless we win, then it's my fault because we won. That kind of thing.
Yeah. And I think, look, I don't think people like wake up in the morning like, how can I screw, this person over? Like, I think part of it's like when you look at what makes caring personally hard is many of us got some kind of message when we're, going out into the workplace, like we're 18, 19, 20 years old or younger. And it's like, be professional. There's some version of that. And in many ways sort of leave the human part of you at home, show up at work like a robot. But like, in order to get stuff done, we actually have to bring that human part of us. And in fact, between COVID and now with AI, like I think that's going to be even more important that we see each other's humanity. So part of us, we kind of leave the care personally out because I think sometimes we feel like we're burnt out, we're under stress, we're worried about our own job. Like we're just so busy trying to stay afloat ourselves. And sometimes it almost feels more efficient to kind of leave the sort of caring out. But then we end up, this happens also where we're so busy just getting right to the work that we forget about the human. And then we have to like make up for it by, all those conversations. So that's one reason why caring personally is hard. And then challenge directly. And if you read the book, this starts at a really young age, which is, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all, right? So like, and I've traveled all over the world, and this is a message everyone has heard, or almost everyone has heard. And I think it comes from a great place, which is that we were wired to belong. But now what happens in the workplace is that we don't say the hard thing, right? Because we don't want to get the hurt feelings. We're afraid of the other person's emotions. Yeah. And so I think what's really interesting on sort of the left side of the framework. So I just talked about manipulative insincerity, which is that sort of low care, low challenge. I'm worried more about myself. Like, I don't have the energy. I can't deal with this person. I'm just focused on myself. But I'd say the vast majority of mistakes that we tend to make is what we call ruinous empathy, which is high care, but low challenge. And honestly, I teach Radical Candor because this is the mistake I make most often, and it really holds me accountable to try to make the mistake less. So I had a guy in my team, 9 times out of 10, he would go above and beyond. Every so often, he'd get really angry. And at the time, I was sort of a conflict avoider, I would say, and I just kept avoiding it. And we got a new boss, and she said, Amy, this behavior has got to stop. And I just kept avoiding it. And I wouldn't even give him criticism. I'd say, oh, I heard about this meeting and I heard you got upset, but don't worry. I mean, it's so stressful. You got so much on your plate. Like I couldn't even say it. And it kept getting worse and worse and worse. We had this offsite that this new boss had organized. He shows up in shorts. It was supposed to be like business dress. And he starts yelling at the presenter. And she stopped the meeting. My boss stopped the meeting and said, Amy, outside. And she said, you have got to tell him his job is on the line. This stops or he's out. So I had to now tell him this. And he said, Amy, this is the first I'm hearing about this.
Yeah.
And this was someone we had a really, like, I consider him a good friend, and I really lost that trust. I lost the relationship. I was able to save the job, but, this is how empathy, which is foundational. We've got to have empathy, but it's ruinous when we don't have those conversations.
Yeah. So there's another term I saw in the book, radical transparency. And I know I used to date somebody who used the truth like a shield and felt she could say anything to any, she wanted because it was the truth. And that's what separates, I think, radical candor from radical transparency, at least the way that I read it is one is all about treating people like machines and operating them for efficiency. Whereas sometimes relationships require not transparency. Sometimes you need some privacy in a relationship.
Yeah. And I'm not an expert in radical transparency, but what I will say is that these conversations are one-on-one private conversations. So when it comes to criticism, we want to do it privately. So absolutely transparency around salaries. There's things that it's really important that everyone understands, especially to prevent bias. But in general, from a radical candor perspective, you want to have these one-on-one conversations privately. And if it's public criticism, you're going to really, you talked about psychological safety, you're going to really damage trust. People are going to be pretty afraid to speak up in meetings. We want to create a culture where people do feel safe to speak up, to have healthy debate. Want to clarify, private criticism does not mean we don't have debates. We have very healthy debates. It's one thing to say, oh, Clint wants, project A, Amy wants project B. Let's have a healthy debate about the merits. Maybe we even switch sides. Now I'm going to talk about why we should do project A. So there's a difference between like a healthy exchange of ideas versus, Amy, when you were arguing for Project A, you neglected to mention that your brother-in-law owns that company and that's why you were arguing for it. That would be a piece of criticism to share with me privately.
Right. And so how do you differentiate between that and brutal honesty? Some people, just want to be unfiltered, double shotgun, boom.
I think brutal honesty is very similar to the obnoxious aggression. Again, it's measured not at the speaker's mouth, but at the listener's ear. One thing will be helpful, I can share a story about what radical candor actually looks like so people kind of know what good is.
Yeah, it'd be great.
But I consider brutal honesty basically the same as obnoxious aggression, which is that high challenge, low care. Oh, I'm just telling you like how it is. But the thing is, it's all measured at the other person's ear. So if you have the kind of relationship with someone where the care has been established, maybe you say something to them that for them is radical candor, but for me, it might land as obnoxious aggression. So I think it's really important for folks to understand that there's not an absolute measure of radical candor. It's going to look different for different people. So there might be, I've led sessions where someone's like, oh, I don't mind. Just tell me I have spinach in my teeth, like in front of the whole group. I don't care. But that's probably a small number. Most of us would want to have it privately. So again, that's brutal honesty. I would put on a par with obnoxious aggression because we're leaving out the human part.
All right. And do you have a typical example you like to say of what radical candor is then?
Yeah. So when we talk about radical candor, it's about being kind and clear. I do a lot of like train the trainer sessions. I just led one where people were sharing their stories. And so we always like people to have a story. Think about somebody who gave you feedback, and in this case, criticism, because feedback is both praise and criticism. And, I very often we will remember these sort of big ticket moments where somebody like almost like changed the trajectory. It could be something as simple as, Amy, like when I'm sharing my presentation and I think that I'm sharing my screen, somebody tells me that I'm not sharing, I'm not sharing the screen because I don't want to be leading a presentation the whole time. I'm not be sharing it. A short example that I can give you, I was leading a workshop a few years ago, and I'm left-handed. I was writing on the wall, and so there's like ink on my hand. If lefties know what I'm talking about, and we had a break, and this person, she pulled me to the side and she said, "Amy, I love this workshop. I'm getting so much out of it." Like she instantly established care. Like I could tell she meant it. She said, "I did just want to let you know." She's like, "Because I would want to know. There's magic marker all over your chin." That was all she needed to, that's all she needed to say. By the way, she's like, and she happened to have one of those like travel mirrors and she's like, "Look, see, it's right there." So I was able to fix it. We don't necessarily have to fix it. Like that was kind of above and beyond, But, the fact that she pulled me to the side, she did it privately. She was invested in my success. I have longer stories, but I think that's a quick one. A longer story is, one of my bosses over the years, who was a chief marketing officer, after this meeting where we had launched this new website, he asked, he reflected back, basically, I was so focused on the CEO and the CFO that I completely ignored my team. And the way he shared that with me was, he acknowledged that I'd gotten this new project. He knew I was really excited. He checked in with me how I was feeling after the workshop. And when he gave me the feedback, he shared it in a way that was like, Amy, I love how competitive you are. And I know you can be a great manager. But a great manager lets your people shine. And he very specifically told me where I was messing up. He's like, he listed to me what had happened, because I had totally missed it. Like, I had missed that I had interrupted one of my team members. I missed that I didn't even let them speak. It was just, it seemed so obvious to me what I was doing, that having that extra perspective, because I wasn't even noticing how it was landing for them. So he was like an extra set of eyes for me.
Oh, that's nice. We talked a little bit about empathy, but what role do you think empathy plays in Radical Candor?
Empathy is foundational to the practice. I mean, for me, it really is this care personally. At a minimum, what does care personally mean? Like, I see you as another human being. You're worthy of respect simply by the nature that you're a human being. Like, and so I think there's two kinds of respect. In fact, Kim wrote a book called Radical Respect as a follow-up to Radical Candor, because this is about what happens when like power, bias, prejudice, bullying comes into the equation. But just at a minimum, like how to create a more respectful workplace. Like, you're a human being, I'm a human being. We might have all these different, sort of different things about us, but that's sort of common human decency. That's sort of the minimum, is like, can I look at you, fellow human being, common human decency? And I think the idea of empathy is about really perspective taking, which is that, when I'm sharing my perspective with you, I'm like, hey, Clint, this is how I'm looking at it. How are you looking at it? And so I care about you. I am doing this because I care about, either you succeeding or the project succeeding. And I see you as a full human being. But it becomes ruinous when I don't act. And compassion is really sort of empathy plus action is compassion. And so that's why it really is compassionate candor.
So you talked about caring personally, and how do you balance that with challenging directly when emotions are so high?
Yes. So there's a few different things happening there. One is about emotions, and one is about the balance of caring and challenging. These are organic, like conversations are going to be organic things. One thing that I like to have people think about with that sort of 2x2 framework is at the end of any conversation, like, do I feel like this person is clear on what I'm either saying to them or what my challenge is for them? So that's sort of the challenge directly. Like, do you feel, was I clear? Do I need to clarify further? And do you feel like I was being kind? So I think that's one kind of useful metric. Like, oh, like, did it land in a way that you feel like was either helpful or that I was being kind? And was I being clear? Very often, if I may quote Brene Brown, clear is kind. Like, very often the kindest thing that we can do for each other, if I didn't answer the question in the way that you found helpful, the kindest thing you could be for me would be to say, oh, Amy, I didn't quite get that definition of radical candor. Could you try doing it in another way? Like, that would be the kindest thing you could be, just be like, that didn't work for me. Maybe you could explain why it didn't work, or, guide me into a better place. But very often the kindest thing we can be is clear. So I think they actually mutually reinforce each other. Now, when it comes to emotions, that's a whole other conversation. So before we get into emotions, let me first just check and did that distinction, because sometimes we might sort of start up high on care, then we might move out on challenge. Like, we might be messing up. We might be getting a little bit too aggressive, and then we realize, oh, we got to move up on care. So it's dynamic.
Yeah, it is. And it's funny, as you were talking, I was reminded of a situation several years back for me. I had just taught a 2-day workshop, and the person that brought me in had been recommended that I would come in, and he says, and the words are very kind, but the way he said it was clear that he was not happy with it. He goes, well, you're a great instructor, right? I'm like, okay. you always get these great scores. I'm like, okay, what are you trying to say? You don't like that? I mean, it was condescending instead of being kind. I just didn't understand the whole purpose of what he was trying to get across. It was interesting.
It's a great example because it brings up a few different things. Very often you mentioned about like leading workshops, and when we lead our workshops at companies, people want like, give me the script. What can I say? And we really try not to be too didactic. We try not to, like, there is no perfect script, because what's going to work well for a conversation between the two of us is going to look different if you were talking to Kim or if you were talking to Jason, or, if I was talking to Jason, it would look different, right? Because, these are one-on-one human conversations. So that's kind of thing one, is that there's no perfect script. We do have certain models that we like to use that people find very helpful that we can talk about. But when it comes to kind of tone and emotions, like what you're talking about, there's some really interesting improv exercises where you could have like the same exact sentence and you could say it totally differently. I mean, you're a great instructor, right, Clint? Like, you are a great instructor, Clint, right? Like, there's so many different ways you could say that one line and it's going to land different, right? Based on, and people, I mean, we've got such good BS meters. Like we can definitely read that. So that's why we want to have this like in a real-time conversation, whether it's on the phone or video. But you talked about the magic word, which is emotions, which is, I think, this is why this very simple idea of caring and challenging can often go off the rails. Like, I am afraid of having this conversation because ruinous empathy, I don't want to hurt their feelings. So ruinous empathy is like, oh my gosh, this person's going to cry. I'm going to back off the challenge because I can't deal with their emotions. Or what's really interesting, I find, with manipulative insincerity, that sort of bottom left mistake of the low care, the low challenge. The story I told you about where I was afraid to give that team member of mine feedback, a good bit of it was ruinous empathy. Like, I didn't want to hurt his feelings. And if I'm honest with myself, there was a lot of manipulative insincerity going on. I didn't want to deal with his possible frustration, with his emotional response. I wanted everyone to like me. I want to be the cool boss, the people pleasing. So I think emotions are such a big part of this. We joke, like, if I had some sort of emotional Novocaine that I'd invented, I'd be on a, desert island somewhere. I don't know how many podcasts I would be on, but like, emotions are going to be there. And what I have found is that how we show up with each other when we're having difficult emotions, like, that is actually where trust is built. That is where, there's a lot of quotes. People are not going to remember what you said, but how you felt when you were with them, right? And so we do have some guidance on that, and I can certainly share more about what to do when you're faced with people's emotions. Would that be helpful?
Yeah, I think so, because I have probably 2 or 3 questions around this. Is how do you balance that? You want to be honest, but at the end of the day, if you're not a jerk, you still don't want to hurt their feelings, and there's going to be some amount of that, because everybody probably everybody has a higher expectation of themselves than you do. And so if they're not meeting your expectation, they're certainly not meeting their own. So it's kind of hard to get criticism and not have your feelings hurt a little bit. So how do you balance that? Because you have to be truthful and honest or they can't grow, but at the same time, you don't want to just devastate them. So how do you balance that?
Yeah, that's really kind of the sticky wicket of all of this. And so it's a good segue, because I want to make sure I get to your question. But one of the things that's really important for folks to understand is that radical candor, when we start to kind of put it into practice, very often we think about feedback. First of all, we think about criticism. So I want to rewrite that a little bit. I want you to think much more about praise than criticism. And we tend to think about like bosses giving direct reports criticism. That, the story, I didn't go into full detail of the story, Steve, my boss, who gave me the criticism about how I was ignoring my team. But we tend to remember those. But it's even more about, radical candor is even more about asking for feedback. It's especially about bosses asking for criticism. If you have any sort of power in a relationship, especially if you've got hierarchical power like that, you've got to lay the power down. But step one in any relationship building is to start by asking for feedback. So I want to make sure that's understood, because when we start soliciting feedback, that's when we can start asking questions like, hey, we're going to be working together on this project together. What will be the best way for me to share my perspective with you? Or, tell me about a boss you had. Like, what was it that you liked about what they did? Or, we've been working really closely together. What's one thing I did last week that you wish I'd done a little differently? Or, what's something you might have needed from me that I could have been helpful? Or, I could say, hey, Clint, here's what I'm trying to accomplish with my answer to your question. What's one way I could have made it even more helpful for your audience, right? So starting by soliciting feedback, asking for feedback, being really clear about the kind of feedback that you're looking for. If you think about building trust, right? Building safety, if you've been soliciting feedback from someone and rewarding it, not just asking and being like, oh, thanks, okay. Like, you got to actually do it. You put it into practice. Oh, okay. Thanks, Clint. That's super helpful. So you're saying if I started with the story sooner, then we could have referenced back the story. Okay, cool. Next time I'm on the podcast, I'll just jump right into a story, right? So you got to reward the candor. But if you have a different perspective, like just share with the person, hey, I hear you on this. I can agree with you here on this part. I see it differently. Like have a thoughtful disagreement. That's how we build trust, right? Is that we're kind of having this healthy back and forth sharing. What do you think?
Mm-hmm. I agree. And it brings up another question I was going to ask you about trust, because it does seem like to have radical candor, you need a foundation of trust. And do you find that, so I'm lucky enough that I get to work with most people face to face, and you can build trust not only through what happens in the meetings, but you get to know them personally and you're talking to them over lunch or over coffee, and you kind of establish a rapport with that person. But in today's world, when there is so much virtual and or hybrid, I feel like trust might be a little bit harder, or you may have to get to it differently. So how do you see that from your world if you deal with a lot of virtual teams? How do you build trust so that you can actually have radical candor?
Great question. Comes up quite a bit. A couple things. One is Radical Candor has always been a virtual team. So we've one of the ways that we do it is we set time aside. We have our kind of weekly team meeting. We have some connection time. We make it. It's kind of like a standing practice where I have one-on-ones with people that I don't work directly with, but they are there so that in those one-on-one meetings, I can solicit feedback, because I like to use one-on-one meetings as a chance to solicit feedback. Hey, how could I have done this better? After the podcast, we leave like 5 minutes after. Kim will often just call me. We'll talk about, hey, this worked really well. Hey, we could do this. So it's just sort of like almost baked into the fabric where we are soliciting feedback from each other. We're giving each other specific and sincere praise. We have a focus on the good stuff, Slack channel where we give specific and sincere praise for the full group. So we're always trying to look out for those things. So I think one thing is having one-on-one meetings, because that's going to be the place where we can solicit feedback, especially for bosses. So that's one thing. I do think we have to be a bit more intentional when we're in a remote or virtual environment. There's been some very interesting research about with emotions, like video versus phone. I think what's most important is that it's a real-time conversation. We don't want to have these conversations in Slack or, oh, hey, thumbs up. Like we want it to be a real back and forth. So whether it's phone or video, but you want to bring in sort of the body language, and that kind of gets us to emotions. And when I think about how people build trust, when that question comes up, I always like to sort of put the question on the person, how do people build trust with you? And I think it's a very good conversation for you to have for yourself, for you to have with the people that you work with. And it very often shows up with Care Personally and Challenge Directly, like, oh, I could trust that I knew if I was messing up, this person was going to tell me. One of the biggest decays in psychological safety is that feeling of like, oh my gosh, there's this side conversation that everyone is in that I don't know about. This feeling like everyone is sort of talking about me. Do you know what you know what I'm talking about?
What is it? It's what's the word? It's not a conspiracy if it's true or something.
Yeah. It's like I might be crazy. Like maybe I'm crazy. Like they might still be saying that.
Maybe they really are talking about me.
Yeah, and I think what's so interesting with trust, psychological safety, and radical candor, in fact, so Amy Edmondson, the Harvard Business School professor who coined psychological safety, as you probably know, she and Kim Scott have done some work together. We've all done some work together, and looking at the relationship between candor and psychological safety. And in fact, they're mutually reinforcing. So I'll give you one example. I was just about to teach a course called Improvising Radical Candor. I don't know if you're familiar with improv, the Second City group, right? So, I love improv. And so we were just about to go on stage. I just met these improvisers. This one guy comes out of the restroom. His fly is down. And my first thought was, who's going to tell this guy that his fly is down, And it's like, Amy, it's you. First of all, you're teaching Radical Candor. And number two, like there's literally no one between this guy and the audience. So I pulled him to the side. I told him he was hilarious. He was an improviser. But I share that story for a few reasons. First of all, just kind of naming that, like, I teach this to hold myself accountable to practice it. Like my default is going to be like, oh, someone else is gonna do this, or somehow he's magically gonna figure out that he needs to zip his fly, right? No. Yeah. But also because before we go on stage for our podcast, or we record the podcast, we say to each other, "Got your back." And that's actually what we do in improv. We say to each other, "Got your back." And so you think about this link between trust and candor. I can go on stage, or I can record the podcast because I know if I'm messing up, somebody's going to tell me. And I know if I'm doing something really well and they want to see more of it, they're going to tell me. And so these are mutually reinforcing. Like it builds trust when we actually share what's not working, because we know, oh, I don't have to worry. Like if I'm messing up, someone's going to tell me, rather than finding out a year later, Amy, you've been making the same mistake over and over and over.
Well, it's kind of funny because it ties into something you said earlier, and also a story from early in Kim's book about a guy named Bob. In both situations, there was bad behavior happening on that person's part, and through different reasons. Either because I think in her case, in Kim's case, it was more that she thought it was easier to fix it herself than to worry about trying to fix him. Yeah. And in your case, it was not wanting to hurt feelings. But in the end, they both had the same reaction of, well, this is the first I'm hearing about it. What the heck? And so it's, when you told the fly down story, I was thinking to myself, maybe it's part of the bit. Maybe he was going to go out on stage and see how long it took somebody to say something. I didn't know.
Oh, that's good too.
I'm doing research. How long does it take to tell somebody to know my fly is down?
Oh my gosh. No, this was real. This totally happened. And
yeah.
The reason I like this story is because, look, I'm teaching this stuff. I still have that first reaction of like, oh, someone else is going to do it, right? Like we're sort of like, oh, someone else is going to say it. But I will say, and this goes actually back to emotions and trust, because I have found, first of all, I've been working at Radical Candor now coming on 8 years this fall. And this is the first workplace where I have been having these conversations. And I think part of why we are afraid to have these conversations, and this goes back to what you said of like sort of the hurt feelings, right? And look, when the story I shared a little bit about Steve, my boss, the chief marketing officer, who told me how I was messing up in this meeting, it did hurt my feelings at first. Like I'm very sensitive. I wasn't happy to hear it. It felt a little bit like a kick in the gut. But thank goodness, how much worse it would have been if he hadn't told me, and then my team would have left, which is what would have happened because I did check in on them. Or, if he had done obnoxious aggression and just kind of yelled at me in the middle of the meeting, Amy, your team hates you, like I would have known what it was. Or, the manipulative insincerity, which is where he's just talking about me, like to a friend, Amy thinks she's the greatest and she's never going to change. And so I think it's very helpful to think about what gets us in the way of having these conversations. And so, like I said, it really hasn't been until working at Radical Candor. And I have had some of these difficult, uncomfortable conversations, but they are trust builders, because what happens is that when we start to realize like, oh, this was hard for the other person too. I had Jason is our CEO. He's my boss. And there was some new project that was announced, and I was really surprised that I wasn't included in it. And so I said, and I went into this conversation. Usually I like to go into the conversation with my sort of bullet points prepared. The model that we like to use for feedback is CORE, context, observation, result, expected next step. It's kind of similar to SBI model, if people know that, from the Center for Creative Leadership. So I like to kind of write down my feedback beforehand so that I can give it real time. But I didn't even think there was another. I didn't even think that there could have been another perspective. I just was like, Jason, why am I not included on that? Like, and he was like, I have to say, I'm really surprised that you feel this way. And I was like, because we like to name our emotions. And I was like, I am feeling very surprised and frustrated that you're surprised. And it was sort of hilarious. But I share it just because, when would I ever have had that kind of conversation, let alone with my boss, Right. And so we were, and it was because we were able to name our emotions and we were both feeling like frustrated and surprised. But that gets us closer because I feel like he can feel, as my boss, he knows that if something's pissing me off, he can actually do something about it. He can't do something about it if I'm just stewing away, especially virtually. This is, I think, one of the biggest things. You get an email, you're pissed off, and you're like, rah, 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 and you don't have, and then you just are building the frustration, right? Rather than having that conversation. So he can't do anything if he doesn't know, what, if I haven't told him. But what's also helpful is like Kim Scott, who wrote the book, we've had conversations. If you're feeling a strong emotion, what would be most helpful? Kim doesn't want a big deal made of it. She just wants to keep moving forward. So different people are going to want different things when emotions come up. Like one person might want to, I might say, look, Clint, this is like bringing some stuff up for me. Let's pick this up in the afternoon. Is that okay? Or let's just, I just need to go for a quick walk. So just thinking about what's going to work for you, what's going to work for the people that you work with when some strong emotions coming up.
Well, that concludes part one of my conversation with Amy Sandler, principal coach and podcast host at Radical Candor. Coming up in part two, Amy talks about giving criticism versus praise and offers advice on how to ensure your praise is both specific and sincere.
Ideally, we're doing this often enough that we could just give one piece of praise. Like, hey, Clint, this worked so well in the podcast when you brought in your own stories. Like that enabled me to like flesh out my ideas even further. Stories are great. Keep it up, right? Like that's specific and sincere praise. Like, and sometimes people think like, oh, I need to have given like 5 pieces of praise to 1 piece of criticism or like 7 to 1. It's not a paint by numbers, but what matters is we really do want to focus on the good stuff. Like this is what motivates people, but not when we're just like giving throwaway praise, like, oh, Amy, great website. Like that is not helpful. Like it's got to be specific and sincere. So put some effort into your praise. I think that people really fall short there.
Thanks for listening to The Conversation. To find out more about Clint, go to clintonmpaget.com and pick up Clint's book, How Teams Triumph, Managing by Commitment, at Amazon. The Conversation with Clinton M. Paget is a production of Forbes Books.